Live from the Talking Joe studios, it's Talking Joe.
Talking Joe weekly podcast. Talking Joe is there. Talking Joe thought we would last. Talking Joe is there. Find each other like a married couple. Our podcast on the air. Talking Joe is there.
Talking Joe is the code name for a completely untrained special podcast force. Its purpose, to produce a regular comic review show while breaking and replacing a series of presenters from across the world.
Talking Joe. Talking Joe is there. Talking Joe. We are on our soapbox. Nobody seems to care. Fighting for fandom wherever there's trouble. The podcast on the air. Talking Joe is there. Talking Joe. Talking Joe.
Talking Joe is on the air.
Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the best and longest running dedicated G.I. Joe comics podcast. Today we will be looking at G.I. Joe issue 278 with a very special guest, find out who in a second, as well as all of the regular favourites like Toy Talk and the segment that is completely reverential to the special and serious place that G.I. Joe exists in our hearts. It's INUEN-JOE. And so without any further ado, let's introduce the Jiminy Cricket to my Pinocchio. It's my co-host, Tim. How are you, sir?
I'm your conscience, Mark, and I'm doing well. Don't lie to me ever.
That's okay.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Talking Joe universe. How are you all?
Yep, they're all listening because you did tell the internet, so it's we have to be on our best behavior. But Tim, I'm going to stop talking to you because you're old hat. You're old news because we've got someone else joining the show this week, and I'm very excited to have them on board. Let's find out who it is.
All right, stop. Whatever you're doing, TJ's back, the airwaves we're chewing, rocking a G.I. Joe podcast, interview special, questions will be asked. Will it ever stop? Yo, I don't think so, not as long as someone's publishing Joe. Artists, writers, G.I. Joe fanboys, let's get this thing started and hope we don't annoy our guest in the studio right now. They've come in for a chat discussing when, where and how. Probing, we're going in deep. Anything left, we might as well be asleep. Questioning them about the G.I. Joe history, unwrapping answers like a whodunit mystery. TJ interview. TJ interview. TJ interview.
It is the artist of the very issue that we are talking about today. It's the artist of issue 278 of G.I. Joe. It is Dan Schoening, aka Dapper Dan. He's an animator and comics penciler based in the city of Victoria in British Columbia, Canada. Or at least he was when this was written. We'll find out if that's still true. Dan graduated from animation school in 2000 and has worked for companies such as Disney, Pixar, Archie Comics, DC Comics, Upper Deck, AKA Studios, Ape Entertainment, and IDW Publishing. He's been the artist on IDW books such as Back to the Future, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mega Man, and Ghostbusters. But most importantly for us to hear today, he is the artist on the book that we will be talking about on our show, G.I. Joe 278. Hello, Dan.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
It is a pleasure to have you on board.
I almost got tired thinking, or like when you were going through the list of all the stuff that I've done, I was like, oh my gosh, I need more coffee.
How on earth did I get
Thanks for having me
that?
on, though. I appreciate it.
No, it's great to have you on board. And fact correcting time now. Is everything I just said true?
Yeah, I think so. It sounds true, and if you added a few extra things, that's fine. It's okay to embellish. So
Very good. I left out what is possibly the most important thing from your career history there, which is apparently that you worked at Toys R Us.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I'm impressed that you know this much about me. That was back in the 90s. So like the mid 90s I worked there. So right when the Nintendo 64 was coming out.
Okay.
Yeah, we had some G.I. Joe toys there at the time, but it wasn't, I think at the time in the 90s, from what I can remember, there weren't a lot of G.I. Joe toys out, but
I sort of dwindling out towards the late 90s there. There was
it was like when
between.
Kenner came out with the new Star Wars line and all that stuff. So, yeah, it was a while ago. Time flies.
Dan, do you remember the music that would play over the speakers at your Toys R Us? And did you have any control over that music?
I can't remember. I think all the controls for the music was in the boss's office. But yeah, I think they had like a generic type elevator music. Occasionally, Girl from Ipanema would play, but it was it was interesting to work there, and not what I had expected when I applied, because I thought, oh geez, I get to play with these toys all day, and it actually ended up being like training to be a parent, because you're actually picking up toys from other people constantly throughout the day. You're cleaning up, so it was good practice.
There must be a lot of people, taking it off the shelf, having a look, dumping it down wherever, and constantly going around the aisles, picking them up, putting that back where they should be, right?
Yeah, most definitely.
Dan, did you work there during a holiday season?
Oh yeah, no, I worked there for about 5 years, so I was there when Tickle Me Elmo came out. So I knew what that was like. I don't know if you've ever seen Jingle All the Way with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Every holiday season, there's one toy everyone has to have.
I want the Turbo Man action figure with the arms and legs that move, and the Rocky Roaring jetpack, and the boomerang shooter.
Getting it is every child's dream.
Whoever doesn't can be a real loser.
Finding it
You got the doll, right?
is this father's nightmare.
I'll get that toy. I promise.
It's one of my favorite holiday films, but you know how they give out those balls to get the Turbo Man doll? We kind of did something similar to that when I was working at Toys R Us with the Tickle Me Elmo. So we had to like auction off the few the few dolls that we had. It was quite interesting how the fever pitch, for that doll during that season. So I think it ended up in people's closets by January, the month after Christmas. So
very good. So I guess you've graduated from animation school in 2000, so that's almost 20 years ago now. So you must have had 20 plus years in the business. What brought you to animation and drawing more generally? What got you to that point? Was it just a childhood fervor for drawing?
Yeah, I would say so. Like I kind of grew up on Saturday morning cartoons, and especially like the early Disney films, the Alice in Wonderland, and what other ones can I think of? Snow White, obviously, Pinocchio, Dumbo. So I grew up with that, and of course, like I had mentioned, the Saturday morning cartoons. I think I would have been about 8 in 1984, so it was kind of right when I was getting into like really having some toys and really getting into the waking up early like I am today and watching all the shows. So I think that was really my first also introduction to G.I. Joe was the Saturday morning cartoon. But I was right into it at the time, and I had quite a few of the action figures. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So was it cartoon first, then figures, and did you dip your toes into the comic at that point?
Yeah, no, I did. It was definitely the cartoon that introduced me to the toys, and then I had quite a few of the action figures from what I remember. I didn't have a lot of the larger, cool, I always wanted the F-14, the jet fighter. Never got that.
What the Sky Striker is that?
Yeah, that's it. And of course, the holy grail was that aircraft carrier. I never knew anybody who owned it, but you could see it in the Sears catalog, and it's like, oh, it'd be nice to have that. That would have been cool. But and I did read some of the comics growing up, but I was kind of more of a Spider-Man guy and a Batman and the Flash. Those were my favorites. So, but the G.I. Joe comics were great, especially when they crossed over when Marvel had it with the Transformers. That was really cool. I thought that was really neat.
Dan, did you have a comic book store? Were there newsstands or bookstores that sold comics on spinner racks?
Oh yeah, for sure. Back in the 80s, we had. I've been grateful to live in the same city pretty much my whole life, and we had this really amazing comic shop downtown, and it was just, you get that smell when you walk into a comic store with the paper and just all these amazing pieces of art. We had spinner racks, and we also had you'd have comics at 7-Eleven and the corner stores, but yeah, luckily we had a great comic store here in town, and now we have about 3 of them, so it's looking good.
Ooh, 3 comic book stores.
Yeah, for a small city like I'm in, that's pretty impressive.
Excellent. So you mentioned the obviously G.I. Joe cartoons and toys back in the 80s, but what was your real appointment viewing for those Saturday morning cartoons? Was there one that was a particular favorite
that stood out? Ooh, well, I was a big fan of Muppet Babies. I really like that. I know that's kind of left field, but Transformers, G.I. Joe, I watched all those. I loved Mask. Luckily, I've been able to we did a couple covers for that one. IDW had the license for that, and which kind of ties into G.I. Joe with Matt Tracker. And what else is there? And Humanoids, I love that. Real Ghostbusters, obviously. I kind of have to say that. Pretty much anything that was on Saturday morning I liked. So
excellent. Golden Age. So, and what was it that created the spark that got you drawing yourself, and how did all that progress?
I think the biggest inspiration was the Dragon's Lair arcade game, which came out, I think it was 83 or 82. But that just totally captured my imagination, because I was like, look at this amazing animation done by Disney animators.
I think it was Don Bluth, if I remember
correctly.
It was,
Don Bluth. He started his own studio after he left Disney with John Pomeroy and Gary Goldman. And with, I can't remember, I think it was Rick... I can't remember his last name, but they kind of formed together to create Dragon's Lair, that Laserdisc game, and they did the second one after. But that really captured my imagination. I was like, this combined with those Disney animation movies that I talked about and the Saturday morning cartoons just kind of culminated. Am I pronouncing that right? It kind of came amalgamated together. That's the word I'm looking
culminated,
for. Yeah, culminated, that's it. See, it's a bit early still. The coffee is kind of kicking in.
Yeah, that game was something else as well, particularly when you were playing in the arcade, because I think it was quite an expensive game.
It was you'd have to have lots of quarters ready.
And you had to press the joystick at exactly the right moment, and if you didn't,
it's more of a memory
so the games would be
really.
just lasting seconds.
Pretty much, yeah. But now I have it on Blu-ray, so I can play it on the TV. But I still am not that good at it. Just watch it for the animation.
Cool. So you followed on with the drawing and actually went to study it at animation school.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, no, I went to Van Arts in Vancouver, and I was there for a whole year. It was like an intensive 1-year traditional animation. So I learned the basics of hand-drawn animation, and we did life drawing and storyboarding. Kind of covered everything that you would be doing on a production for TV or film. And it was an excellent experience, very much worth the time. I think the hardest thing was animating a horse, just to kind of grasp your hand around 4-legged animals. But it was definitely an experience I would never trade for, and it led into some amazing opportunities in the future. So, yeah.
Excellent. And so that sounded like it gave you a real, actually, sort of foundation of all of the skills that you needed to use in animation. Did that then springboard you into some actual career opportunities then in working in the business?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was even before I left. I actually started doing, before I finished school, I started working on some commercials, just storyboarding those. And then after that, I got a job working at AKA Studios, which you had mentioned earlier, working on a show called Ed, Edd and Eddy, which is on Cartoon Network. The irony was that they didn't play it in Canada. So I had never actually watched a full episode. So when I got hired they sat me in a room and I watched all of the episodes just to kind of catch up on that. So it was quite an education in a short amount of time. But it was a lot of fun to work on that show because it was very creative. The art style was really unique, and the characters were really funny. So there's a lot of funny people working on that show at the time.
Yeah, this might be jumping ahead because this is a little less biographical and more analytical. But can you talk about storyboarding as training for drawing comics?
Yeah.
Or animation school as training for drawing comics, which is a little different than animating.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I think the biggest difference for storyboarding for TV or film than comics is the use of time, because you can't jump around like you can in a comic. You have to kind of play out a full scene instead of jumping around within different time frames that you can do in a comic book. So with storyboarding, it's more linear, I suppose. But it's great training because you get an idea of how comic books and animation and film are really about expressing a story and expressing it in a way for, like, you're showing the viewer exactly what you want to see for them to see, and yeah, it's just another form of storytelling. So it was a great springboard to get into comics, and it was never my general intention to get into comic books. I just kind of fell into it, so to speak. But it was, yeah, without that animation training, I don't know, I wouldn't have the same kind of respect for the story. So, because that's, for me, it's the key to have a really good story to start off with. But hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah. And my second question is, so comics tend to not pay as well as animation.
Mm-hmm.
And I know artists who bounce back and forth, or who, you know, go from one publisher to another, or go from one small freelance to one large freelance job, and they're just sort of cobbling it all together. Mm-hmm. You have been drawing comics seemingly exclusively for the last several years. Mm-hmm. Do you want to go back to animation? Do you aim to go back to animation?
That's a good question. You know, it would be wonderful to do that again. I wouldn't be opposed if I was offered something that was in animation. It's not really a goal, but if it came up, I would definitely do it. But it is good. I really like variety, so it's nice for me to kind of step out from doing one thing constantly for a while. So I currently I have a few things on the table that are completely different from each other, which helps keep things fresh. So. But I definitely wouldn't be opposed going back into animation, and it would be really nice to try it again. So if anybody's doing any animations, give me a shout.
Could we safely presume that in working consistently on one property for one publisher, right, Ghostbusters at IDW, that there is that they know you're reliable, and you know that if the book keeps selling, seemingly you'll keep getting asked back. So some of this, I assume, is a kind of reasonable job security, and I'm going to assume you're a crazy Ghostbusters fan.
Yeah, that would be correct on both terms. Yeah, definitely Ghostbusters was a huge part of my life. I saw the original film when it came out in the theaters, so it was that really sparked the fire for wanting to draw proton streams for 10 years. But yeah, no, it's definitely, like you mentioned how it doesn't pay as good as, there's a lot more money in animation for TV and film than there are in comic books. But I think at the end of the day, I measure success by doing something that I love to do and not by a monetary value. So it definitely doesn't pay as good, but it's something that I love to do, and I don't consider it work. So I think that's, I'm very grateful for that, yeah.
I saw another video of you talking about some of your work on Ghostbusters and Back to the Future, and what struck me was as you're just saying, a real enthusiasm about enjoying drawing almost full stop and being paid for it, but also on the properties that you're working with. And it's interesting, seeing artists, they're different attitudes to it. Some people are very much this, this is my job, I'm doing it because I'm getting paid for it. But I could, what was coming across in that was this, your real enthusiasm for doing what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think that passion, no matter who the artist is, it really shows how much they love the property or the characters when you're looking at the art or reading the story. So I think that makes a big difference. And the kind of I was very grateful that I was offered to do the issue of G.I. Joe. So because that was something that growing up, like I had mentioned, it was something that was a really integral part of my childhood, and just to kind of pay a bit of homage back for all the great times playing with the action figures and puddles and stuff. It's kind of my payback to Hasbro.
Excellent.
And Larry.
So Dan, who first contacted who about drawing an issue, and when was this, and what was the pitch or the remit? It was like, do you want to draw one issue of G.I. Joe?
Yeah, actually, that was pretty much it. It was Tom Waltz, who was my editor on Ghostbusters, also is the editor on G.I. Joe, and he had contacted me, I think it was like about a year ago, and he was like, oh, would you like to do a G.I. Joe issue? And I was like, oh, I'd love to do one. And just because we're kind of finishing, I think, issue 4 of Ghostbusters Year 1, and I was looking for some new stuff, and it was an opportunity to try something completely different. And Tom was like, well, I'm going to give you a choice of a few different issues. He sent me back 4 different short little synopsises, and as soon as I saw one of them was taking place in the Arctic, I knew right away that was the one I wanted to do, because those characters that I always loved, the snow terrain characters a lot, so like Blizzard and Snowjob were a couple of my favorites. So it was I immediately knew that was the one I wanted to do, and so I shot that back. And thankfully, the colorist who I've worked with for 10 years, Luis Delgado, was available to color the issue as well, and it kind of just formed from that. So, and the process was a bit different than what I was used to. Larry's writing style is amazing, and it really gave me a lot of opportunity to kind of take each scene into my own hands and kind of form it. There's a lot more opportunity for creativity the way that he writes. So, and not to slight any other writer, but it's a different form, and it was a lot of fun to try it out.
Yeah, for sure. It's putting more onus on the artist to interpret the script and make the choices right, rather than I guess working to a more detailed version of what it will look like on the plane.
Yeah, most definitely.
Probably more scope for an artist to interpret a Larry script in quite a different way, because there is more left for interpretation of how things end up on the page.
Yeah.
This also comes from Larry Hama having drawn comics. He knows what an artist wants or needs or doesn't want, because he was drawing comics for years before he wrote them, and I have read some Hama scripts, and there's a visual quality to them.
Yeah, no, when I was reading the script for the first time, I could already see images in my head, which really helps, because then I can just put it onto paper. It creates images in your head as you're reading it. So it was an interesting challenge, because it was something different, but it was also comfortable, because I was able to have that creative freedom.
So this issue looks like the animated series that ran from 83 to 86.
Yeah, that was the intention.
Okay.
To some degree, yeah.
Can you tell us about this? Because very specifically, it's not just that, like, oh, this is drawn in a more open style with less hatching or cross hatching, and it's not just that, like, oh, the blasts are drawn as red and blue lasers. Very specifically, this is patterned to some extent after the model sheet style of the animated series. So what were your references, and when did you decide that this would look like the cartoon?
Oh, that's a good question. I kind of decided after I did the cover, because the cover looks different, I think, than the interior art. But at the time when I did the cover, it was, way before I got the script. So I was just kind of like thinking, oh, well, let's try this art style. And it was something I was kind of playing around with, a bit more of an ink, adding shadows to the characters. But then when we eventually got the script, I was like, you know what, I'd really like to try and emulate the cartoon while still giving it a little bit of our own signature on it, Luis and I. But I thought, well, my style already kind of leans into animation, and it would be really fun to kind of pay a bit of a homage to the cartoon. And that's kind of where we got with it. And I was able to find quite a bit of reference online. Thankfully, with the internet, we have all this stuff at our fingertips. And it was reasonably easy to find a lot of reference for the characters. So, and I looked a lot at some of the earlier shows of the cartoon to try and make sure that I was getting the right eye shapes and whatnot. But it was. I think hopefully that answers your question. But
yes, it does.
I kind of trailed off into the distance there.
But you're talking about the timing as well, was sort of chimed a little bit with what I suspected as well, that as Larry was working through this big 10-part series, Snake Hunt, that he was doing that sort of simultaneously. He was kind of building up a buffer of these untold tales to kind of work on, ready to drop with various artists for them to do, one and done stories, to then give the next artist, Andy Griffith, some time to build up some stock and give him a little bit of buffer and breathing room to have enough time to do several issues on the trot for when they then moved into the past these one and dones and into the the regular continuity again. So when did you actually begin putting pencil to page, and when did you finish up on this one?
Well, I think it was in early September I started it. So, and it kind of leaned into most of October. So usually comics take me about 30 days to do a 20-page issue, because I read the script, look for a reference, and then I do thumbnails for each of the pages, and then wait for any feedback, and then I get into doing the inks, or the pencils inks. And then Luis is super fast, so usually I'm ahead for a little bit, and then he catches up and he's waiting for me to give him more pages. But I think we wrapped it with, there was a few revisions after we had submitted all the pages, and I think it wrapped around November 10th or 11th, around there. So
I was reading about the sort of the style that you approach, or your technique, the process that you take, and it sounds like you use quite sort of a balance of the old analog, pencil on paper, and also the digital technologies that you can also combine with that. Is that right? Do you sort of apply a similar process for this one?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I still work pencil and paper for all the drawings. So I use a brand called Color Erase pencils, which I started using when I was doing animation in animation school, and they got me hooked. And they're still reasonably inexpensive, so for an artist, we can afford it, the pencils. But so I do all the drawings, I scan them in, and I tend to work in an animation approach, so I'll have the characters separate from the backgrounds when I'm doing the drawings. Some of the panels in the G.I. Joe issue that I did are combined, so I actually did the background and the characters together, but most often I'll do them separate, and that way I have better control and management if I want to move things around a little bit when I get them into Photoshop after. So, but I scan it all in and then combine it and send it off, and hopefully Luis doesn't scream that I've put too much detail in, so it takes him too long to do a page.
And what struck me about the style on this issue particularly is, and you sort of mentioned it a little bit when you're talking about the cover that you'd done with the slightly heavier blacks. There was just, how restrained the line work is, and how much then that gives the opportunity for the colorist to really go in and create the texture and sort of looking at things, detailing like the cheeks and the noses and things like that. That a lot of that sort of filling in the gaps is done in the colors, and it must be difficult almost to sort of restrain yourself and to leave the pencils as where they are without going in and adding in all of that stuff and having the trust in your colorist to finish off the vision.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, it's using the style that we did with this issue, it was definitely, we're aiming to emulate the cartoon, but yeah, no, it definitely leaves a lot of space for Luis to go in and kind of add his color magic, as I call it, and I completely trust him with all the pages that I give him. So we kind of have almost a telepathic link. We don't need to really speak too much anymore. I just give him the art and he kind of goes in and he knows what to do right away, which is great. So that's the benefit of having worked with somebody for over 10 years. So very grateful to still have him as my colorist. So
can you differentiate the feeling or the process of working on one licensed property that is owned by Hasbro as opposed to a different licensed property that is owned by Columbia Pictures or Sony? Did you have a different back and forth sort of editorially? You mentioned there were some revisions.
Oh yeah, well I think those were the revisions I had on this one. It was, what was it? We had originally had a different character in the Firebat, and we replaced him. So it was a different type of Viper, I believe. I'm trying to remember, but I don't even know if I'm supposed to tell you guys this. Secrets. Yeah, no, I had to redraw a character in there, but it wasn't. It made total sense to have them swapped. So it was not a problem to do revisions. So I love revisions that add to the story, or if I've made a mistake, I'll definitely fix it. So it's not a problem. But yeah, no, the process working with Hasbro has been fantastic. I've never had any qualms about it. And the difference between working for both companies is not, I didn't really find too much. Occasionally you get a company that you work for that may be a bit more demanding, but it's been an absolute pleasure working for both of them. So yeah, no issues whatsoever. And I've gotten to work with Hasbro on Transformers quite a bit too, so I'm familiar with how they would like things, so we try and aim to do that.
In how many months will you draw another issue of G.I. Joe?
How many before I get to do another one?
Yes.
Oh, that would be up to Tom, so you'd have to ask Tom.
Have you thrown your hat in the ring and said, Tom, I'd love to draw another issue of G.I. Joe?
I said that in the email with the final submission, so it's up to them. Or if you guys really want to see another one, you could put a little bug in his ear and...
Spoilers for the rest of the show, but I would.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, well, it would be an honor to do another one.
And actually, a lot of the G.I. Joe fans can be a little bit notoriously hard to please and be a little bit picky, but I had a quick look online at discussion around this issue, and it was pretty much unanimously high praise from Joe fans, and a lot of people saying that how pleased they were with the art and hoping that you would make a return. So
I'm humbled to hear that. I try not to read reviews, so I appreciate hearing the good ones.
I would be happy to see another issue drawn this way, or another issue drawn like the cover, more of a standard comic adventure style and less of an animation style.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, if I could do either or, so it would be up to, I guess, up to Tom and Larry what they would like to see. But yeah, either or would be fantastic. I still really want to draw Zartan because he's my favorite villain. So maybe one day. I'll cross my fingers.
And if you drew him in an animated style, you'd have to make the choice as to whether you accidentally draw his cowl as hair or not.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I would
emulate the
probably play
cartoon.
around with that and kind of tease a little bit, make fun of it a bit. So it's always good to have a bit of comedy in your action. So just for a little breather.
I think my final question, sort of generally about the issue, is how. All right, so animation's good training for comics, because in comics you're going to have to draw everything and anything, like motorcycles and people and horses and explosions and like the White House.
Yeah.
So G.I. Joe is this particular challenge because there are lots of good guys, lots of bad guys, and then vehicles, and the vehicles are all these very specific things. So how the fanish way of asking this question is, how hard was this issue to draw, which sort of negates that you're a professional and you can handle challenges. But can you talk about the challenges of drawing a G.I. Joe comic specifically, different from other projects you've drawn?
Yeah, I think the most challenging thing was, or the thing I was most aware of, was trying to make sure that I was drawing the characters to proportion to the vehicles. And also making sure that I had kind of like I don't know the better word for it, the nuances of each character, because they're each Larry's written them in such a way that they're really come to life. Like each character is their really unique vision. And I wanted to make sure I captured that. And also to kind of break the panels up a bit and to make them more, like with Ghostbusters in particular, you'll see a big difference, I feel, in the way that I've laid out the panels. So I was really trying to be aware of making each panel exciting and each page, the composition kind of playing into what's happening on the page, if that makes sense. So kind of like I would break, if it was really action-packed page, I'd try and make the panels reflect that. But yeah, I would say the biggest challenge maybe was, the first thing I said was the matching the characters to the vehicles, making sure the sizes were correct, and yeah, hoping that Larry and Tom liked what I was doing. So.
Very good. And before we move on to the deep dive into the comic itself, there was one comment you made rather offhand, which I felt I had to circle back on, which was that you said that you fell into comics, and how does one go about falling into comics?
Oh yeah, well, it was an interesting story. We had a friend of mine, James Eatock. He lives in the UK, and he was producing a book called Serial Geek, which is an amazing book. It covers Saturday morning cartoons, so it would be everything during the 80s, G.I. Joe, Transformers, Thundercats. And I'd done some art for him, and then he was like, oh, I'm going to do this pitch for Ghostbusters, and we'll submit it to IDW. And we did the pitch. They didn't accept the pitch because it was, I believe at the time, it was just too much. Usually when you're doing a new property, or if you're a new team, creative team, you just kind of dip your toes and do 4 issues and see what everybody thinks of it. And I think this arc was like 12 issues, so it was just a bit too much. Really good story, though. Needless to say, anyway, Tom reached out again to me, and he was like, oh, would you like to do an issue of Ghostbusters as just a one-shot? And I was like, oh yeah, I'd love to do that. I was a bit nervous at first, because I was like, oh, I don't know if I could do a full issue of, like a full comic, but needless to say, I was able to do it. So that was kind of how I fell into it, and that was the shortened, summarized version, the Coles notes. But it was I just kind of fell into it, and then ended up doing the ongoing not too long after that, a few months later. So yeah.
Wow, that is very good. That is, as you say, almost falling into.
Yeah, I literally fell into it. So sometimes it's who you know, and the timing. Timing has a lot to do with stuff. Yeah. So it's and obviously you have to have some gumption for it too. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of comic history that's being created by, for example, one artist leaving a book and the next artist entering that editor's room.
Yeah, for sure.
Having the good fortune of being that person.
Yeah, filling the space and just doing your best and enjoying the process. So I think that shows.
Excellent. Let's do a dive into the comic itself.
Comic talk, oh, comic talk. Larry Hama writes them, Tim and Mark discuss them, whoa. Comic talk, oh, comic talk. Larry Hama writes them, Tim and Mark discuss them, whoa.
We'll be talking issue 278, which came out at time of recording, I think 2 weeks ago. So this is fairly fresh off the presses. We've got, as always, writer Larry Hama, artist Dapper Dan Schoening, colors Luis Antonio Delgado.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Letters Neil Utake, editor Tom Waltz and Megan Brown, and research assistant Diana Davis. So let's take a look at the covers.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
So
Cover A is from some guy called Dan.
Yeah,
we've got
cover A. Everybody wants the variant covers.
Not me.
Oh, well,
we've had a long discussion about the place of variants in the market, but not such a fan. It would be nice to have just the cover, and that cover being ideally the best one.
Mm-hmm.
So Snow Job set front and center on this one, with some of the other Arctic forces sort of skiing, flying, and driving down a hill with what looks like an avalanche sort of coming up behind them. A lot of energy here, and animated style explosions. Yeah, and as you say, this looks slightly different to the interiors, that you hadn't quite decided on the style to be using on the interiors before you did this, and I'm guessing just working from a very short synopsis of maybe the characters that might be involved in the issue without necessarily knowing the full details at that point in time.
Yeah, no, you nailed it exactly. It was I only had like a short little sentence or two to go off of for the cover because we didn't have the story yet. But so they were just like, okay, these characters are in it. Just do a cool piece. So I was like, oh, okay, well, let's not show the villains. We're just going to focus on the heroes because we know those guys are in it. And just make it look kind of like they're just dropping in and ready to attack. So
very good.
This cover is really satisfying because Snow Job pops because there's this circular red explosion behind him, and to create a cell shaded or quote animated style color, right? It's not just hard edges and sort of regular colors, and then there are like shade versions. In the case of this explosion, it's also or a glow like a laser beam. It's also sort of airbrushing the color past the line, but sort of as composition. The colors here are really satisfying. Snow Job is white, but you really look at him and he's actually a lot of light blue with a little bit of purple and gray in him, and then there's this red right behind him, and then this dark blue sky. It's mostly satisfying because it is an action cover, and this is an action series, and there are lots of comics where editors or artists draw just a cool, Batman crouching on a ledge with a gargoyle. Like that's really cool. G.I. Joe is an action comic, and I think generally G.I. Joe covers should be action. I'm okay with a cool guy standing there in a cool pose with a cool gun. But I don't want too much of that. This is also fun because Blizzard gets his ski sled, which was such a cool addition in the action figure, because he didn't just have skis; he had skis that clipped into this seat, and then he could on his stomach like sled down a hill. And then it's really fun how low light gets incorporated, because if he's in a vehicle, we might not see him. So he's parachuting in, right? So everything about this, everyone is moving left to right. There's strong diagonals. Laser beams are coming in from the right. There's this avalanche. It's all very exciting.
Oh, thanks.
I think there may be a small mistake.
Probably. I'm sure I missed something.
I wonder if the colors on the left side, all the way on the left, the colors around the missiles are white.
Yeah.
And I think that missile housing is part of the Wolverine, the green tank that CoverGirl is in.
I think there. Sometimes we do make color mistakes, and drawing mistakes. I'm glad you caught that. I wish you were around like a year ago when I was doing it. I would have corrected that, because that's something that I don't. I try and avoid mistakes as much as I can, but they're going to happen no matter what. But sometimes they make kind of neat little things to talk about, though, so that's good. But when
what's that just immediately under the missiles on the far left? Is that another vehicle? The front of another vehicle?
Well, let me just take another.
To me, it looks like the front of the Shark, SHARC.
And I think that one was supposed to be the Dominator, actually. The one that CoverGirl is in.
On the inside.
And I think, and it looks like I may have drawn the Snowcat and the Dominator together. Or maybe they're separate. It's hard to tell with the avalanche. We can say it's either or. But
I don't want it to seem like these errors, like, this is not a deal breaker, and this is not like Tim the angry podcaster or like disappointed fan. This is just me saying, I think that white thing is actually green.
Yeah, no, it should be green.
I still think the cover is great. I still think the issue is great.
Oh, thanks. Well, yeah, no, I totally I see it now, because then I can see the Snowcat down near Snowjob's his left knee. So yeah, no, that should be green. But it's sometimes that happens. But I appreciated your analysis of the cover, and I wanted to add that for me in particular, I always try and make sure that the covers reflect the interior. So, but that's one of the goals I always have. Just thought I'd add that in there.
It's nice to see that sort of continuity of the cover on into the interior, and it definitely matches nicely. And although that scene doesn't necessarily happen in the inside, I think it captures the spirit of what's happening, and all of the same people and the vehicles and everything. So that's it is nice to see. Let's move on to cover B. We've got Jamie Sullivan and colours by Cullen Davis there. Yeah, it's a sort of a spotlight on Lowlight, who we don't always get to see a lot of, and people speculated that this cover might be an homage to New Mutants 87, which is the cable cover with the scopes against various characters, and he said that it was actually more informed by Alpha Flight issue 12, which was the one with the words "and one shall surely die." A bright pink cover with, again, various characters in sort of with the scope sights over the top of them. Interesting looking cover. It's sort of a somewhat in the style of maybe Tim Bradstreet on his Punisher covers. There, I can sort of see some similarities all round. Sort of does what it's setting out to do well.
I like the contrast here, that there's blue on the left and red on the right, though it seems like I don't want a lot of G.I. Joe covers with cool guys standing in a cool pose. This one does make sense for G.I. Joe, because Lowlight's a sniper, and we should see what a sniper does. While covers can and should be exaggerations of the interior, I think having the Baroness, Cobra Commander, and Destro on this cover is a step too far. Although it's not dramatic, or it's not going to sell as well if, like in the scope on the right side, it's like 3 random Cobra Arctic guys.
While the Cobras in the issue are not the ones that are on the interiors, I doubt very much that the artist knew at the time what Cobras would be on the inside, and it was I think probably a decision to have an interesting cover that spotlighted low lights, perhaps not even knowing where it would ever be featured, or certainly just knowing that he would be a character that would be playing a part in a future issue, and to try and do something that was centered around him. And so I don't think we can attach too much blame for him on the choices of Cobras that were used there.
Yeah, it's great that you actually pointed that out, that a lot of the times artists don't know what is in the issue. It's just kind of a really small blurb that we have to work off of. So if the cover doesn't always represent the interior art or the story, it's most likely due to the fact that the artist didn't know what was happening. So.
Yeah, I heard, and I heard a comment from Jamie Sullivan before that was often the case that at the point of being commissioned for a cover, they wouldn't entirely know the contents of it, and that it was normally only the interior artist who might have that privilege of being able to actually work to the contents, because they're doing both jobs.
Congratulations to Colin Davis, who's a friend, for his first color work on a G.I. Joe comic.
Oh, nice.
There's a lot of gray in Lowlight's blue that's sort of lining up with the hatching where the clothing folds are, and I'm not sure if that's in the original art or in the color. There's more black, there's more K in these colors than my preference, but it does set him back. And I like the I like the down angle, or the up angle. I like that we're looking up and there's this emphasis on this sniper rifle.
And it's a bit of fun that Diana Davis and Colin Davis are credited on the same book as well, husband and wife team.
Nice, that's awesome.
Then moving on to the John Royal cover, doing what he does very well. It's a nice action shot. There's a snow job up front with Iceberg behind him, and the Snowcat subtly in the background there, with some nice color choices from James O'Frady there in terms of making an interesting color scene from what is a lot of white in the costumes and the snow itself.
Yeah, Snow Job pops forward because there's a lot of pink on him, and Iceberg pushes back because his blue and green agrees more with the snow around him. But there's a real change, right? The snow that's closest all the way on the bottom is a lot of yellow and pink. The snow in the middle is blue and with some pink, and then the further we get back, the more sort of a pure blue it is. This is a really fun comparison with the A cover that Dan drew, because they are more similar than dissimilar, right? Left to right, diagonal action, downhill, blasts going left and right. There's a Snowcat in the back. And this one isn't sort of as fast. There isn't the speed, because you don't get the sense that these two guys are moving. You get the sense that they're standing where they are or slowly making their way down the hill. But this is a fun sort of miniature study for someone interested in cover design, because this one has two characters in one vehicle, and we're just closer to it. Whereas Dan's cover has 5 characters and 2 or 3 vehicles, and we're a little further away. Right. And yet the cover where we're closer is slower, and the cover where we're further is faster.
Yeah, no, I like the, you notice the difference in values for like the foreground. The snow is much more warm and it gets cooler as you go up. So it helps direct the eye quite a lot. And I try and do that when I'm doing covers, is to have the composition kind of create a circle with your eye. So you're kind of starting at the top left and working your way around kind of counterclockwise back up. I try and design covers like that. But it's represented here in this cover as well, which is nice. So with the faces, and then if you I tend to try and squint a lot when I'm doing, to see where my eye is directed, and it creates a nice counterclockwise circle pattern here with the composition. So
cool. Let's move on to the plot breakdown and find out what is actually happening in an issue. In Frusenland, Cobra have kidnapped geologist Dr. Jen Tang to help them set up terradromes. The story opens in the aftermath of an attack on the terradrome and rescue of Dr. Tang by the G.I. Joe Arctic specialists. Cobra forces chase after the Joes in their wolves and ice sabers, and with dwindling resources, the Joes are able to defeat the pursuing Cobras. Okay, so that's what actually happened, but what shall we talk about on the inside? I think we've talked a lot about the art already, and it's obviously that's the most striking part about the issue is how different the art looks to a in inverted commas typical G.I. Joe book. That it's I think the first comic certainly in the ARAH universe where we're getting this sort of animation cell kind of look to the art. It's and sort of to say that it looks like an animation cell is probably doing you a disservice, because I think a lot of the animation cells there are obviously produced in vast quantities. And so this is a kind of much cleaner, more detailed, idealized version of an animated cell, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe more like the production quality of the G.I. Joe movie compared to the show. That would be a nice compliment. Thank you.
And this being an untold tale, it's set in the past of G.I. Joe history. It's not specifically dated. There's a few hints in there as to when it might happen in G.I. Joe history. It talks to Cobra having tried to set up terradromes before, and there was a big plot around that. It's set in Frusenland in and around issue 68. There's some slightly newer characters, newer in inverted commas, because they're probably still best part of 20-something years old. Mm-hmm. But the presence of characters like the Snow Serpent version 2, the Ice Sabers, it sort of puts us more in the early 90s, maybe around about issue 125 potentially. And we've got the Dominator, which is a Battle Force 2000 vehicle, but no Avalanche, who is the character most associated with the vehicle, and he died in the early 100s as well. So it might not be too much of a leap to assume that because he's not the driver of the vehicle in this issue, he's probably dead. So maybe we're talking issue 120s. Any thoughts there, Tim?
That timeline works. Overall, I love this issue because it's an Arctic issue with all of the Arctic guys. Mm-hmm. And I think many of us who had some of the action figures wanted to do this kind of thing where, you get one of the special guys, like an underwater guy or a desert guy, and you think, a year or two later, there's another one of them, and you can start to make your own special team. This is every Arctic good guy, every Arctic bad guy, and all the Arctic vehicles. And particularly one of the Cobra vehicles, sorry, I don't even remember what it's called, but it's the one that's not the Wolf, is a later vehicle, very much a later vehicle.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the Ice Saber.
Mm-hmm. And I also love in this issue that characters get to engage with their specialty. So the Snow Serpent isn't just some random Cobra guy in the cold. He's a guy who's been here a while. Mm-hmm. And, if you read the Snow Serpent's file card, aren't they recruited from the Cobra Eels?
That's right.
The idea is that they're like dropped into the Arctic or the Antarctic and they're left there, right? So this guy's in charge. He's a jerk. There's a Techno Viper doing what Techno Vipers do, which is fix things. The Joe Arctic guys do Arctic stuff. They ski and they're worried about the cold. And then Lowlight gets to be a sniper. So this is really sad. I'm perfectly fine if, Flint or Rock and Roll is along for the ride, because you might need someone with a machine gun to do something that's not so specifically Arctic. And those two guys know how to put on a white coat.
Yeah.
But where it's like, what's the point of the specialties in G.I. Joe unless you're going to really exploit it? And this issue does this to fun effect. I also like that two of the Cobra guys who are in charge are jerks. That
yeah, they are, aren't they?
Snow Serpent version 1, he's in charge. The mission's gone awry, and he's a jerk. And then the AVAC, the pilot, is a jerk because a lot of pilots have big egos because what they do is really difficult, and he's a jerk. And there's even a line which refers to it. Let it ride. The AVAC pilots are all like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I got that sense when I was reading it, that he was a very no-nonsense, suffer no fools type of officer, the Snow Serpent, at the beginning. So it was really cool to kind of hear that character in my head, and I could imagine it playing out on the show. So yeah, it was really very cool.
What was an interesting thing as well that was done here was that the unnamed Snow Serpent version 1, who's kind of the boss here and ordering around the other Cobras, whereas there's a Snow Serpent version 2, and when they're doing the toys, they're not really doing an awful lot to differentiate them. It's just the latest recolored, slightly redesigned version of the same character.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas here, there's clearly something going on where the different outfits are indicating some sort of rank, where the version 2 Snow Serpents are more junior and being bossed around by the version 1.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we saw this. We've seen this a little bit with the 1982 Cobra Soldier getting replaced with the 1986 Viper. The Viper's cooler and has more gear. And in the show, they're just going to stop drawing the older character because that's not a toy that you can buy. But in the comics, we see both, and we tend to see the Vipers. It's subtle. We tend to see the Vipers sort of more prominently featured or doing more important things.
Mm-hmm.
I may be wrong here, but this might be the first comic appearance of the Snow Serpent as well. I am struggling to think of another time in the comics, and this seems bizarre given the nature of the design and the character, how cool they look and how many stories that we have seen in the snow.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it's actually appeared before this issue. I was flicked through some of the other sort of Frusenland issues and Arctic mission issues, and wasn't able to spot one. There was this cool mission that they go on in the special missions number 2, for example, and that has got Cobra Troopers rather than, for example, Snow Serpent. So I don't think in the US, a Real American Hero stories written by Larry, we've actually seen the character in print before.
Oh, that's cool. First appearance. I always like getting to do those. So yeah. And I had actually just picked I had great free reign with which design I was going with the characters. So I thought I really wanted to discern the two different Snow Serpents to make sure you knew one was the officer and the other were subordinates. So yeah, that's why I went with the two different designs. So
very cool. That was your choice.
Yeah. So
yeah, brilliant.
And
choice.
I love the more 90s G.I. Joe stuff too, like that really like the colors reminds me of the 90s, like the extreme, spelled with an X instead of an E. Drop E. And it's I got that vibe off those characters, or the color palette at least.
Yeah, and I think I have to look up the Snow Serpent version too to be sure. But I think the colours that are being used here are slightly more muted, so it's sort of suggesting that maybe the torso of that character is slightly more brown, maybe even like a sort of Hessian kind of feel to it. Whereas I think the toy itself was a little bit of a brighter kind of yellow or orange.
Yeah, I think Luis probably. Sometimes, depending on the panel and stuff, he may need to adjust the colors just to make sure that everything looks good in the panel. So.
Oh yeah, and talking about sort of the makeup of the cast and also leaning into the animated look, we've got Covergirl and Dr. Tang there, and that's, I think, something that we see from Larry's storytelling, that he does like to try and have a little bit of diversity in the cast in terms of the mix of the sexes, and to include some females to make us a little bit more balanced. And we've seen many or several doctors being female characters, and CoverGirl, while not an Arctic specialist, not looking too out of place, being the Wolverine driver, and in this case driving the Dominator instead, sort of making sense in terms of her speciality. And as you said, one of you said before, that anyone can stick on a coat and then you're ready for the Arctic mission, and the coats looking very much like the kind of coats that we would typically see in the cartoon when Duke and co would be going on an Arctic mission, and it would be the standard look of the character, but then with this kind of coats over the top of the uniform.
Yeah, that's exactly where I got the reference from. So yeah, I tried to make sure that was authentic, because I always liked those coats that they would wear. So I remember that from the show.
And what I liked about this issue as well was almost the simplicity of it. That it was Joe's versus Cobra. We see we've seen a lot of sprawling stories with sort of that stretch over many issues, and we've seen a lot of the special missions and Untold Tales, which are more maybe about the Joes against a generic terrorist, whereas this is it's got a elegant and satisfying simplicity of, these are some Joes who've gone on a mission, they've hit the Cobra base, and now they're being chased, and they're having to find their way out and defeat the Cobras who are after them. Sort of an elegant simplicity to the story, and fitting a lot in and getting it all resolved in the space of 20 pages is no mean feat.
Yeah, for sure. And it's nice to have kind of these one-off issues, because really they're character driven and character focused. So you can have a really simple story, but the most important part is how the characters react in that story, and that's what makes it unique. And it's nice to just have a one-off issue where you can just read it all and feel satisfied with that storyline and able to move on. And
in this case, it's well, like, it's sort of a lot of these characters been around for a long time. So I guess close to 40 years, and the likes of Lowlight. I don't know that we've never had a spotlight on him where he's had the opportunity to actually really properly utilize his specialization and take snipe and take 2 headshots in a row. It's sort of an impossible shot twice. So it's good to sort of mix things up and have those much live characters have a bit of space where they can have a bit more of a solo spotlight and have their moment to shine as well, beyond the core cast that we tend to see.
Yeah, definitely.
I just want to echo what Dan just said about character. I think a lot of times G.I. Joe comics fans remember the action and the excitement. It might be an image, a cover, a panel, a scene, some cool fight or action choreography. And the way that Larry Hama writes is he is including that stuff, and he's aware of it, but he's trying to deal with character. And the moments of this issue where the stakes are the highest are where, for example, Lowlight seems to decide to stay behind to complete the mission, where Frostbite aloud says, what do I do? Do I take these 5 people home and leave a guy and finish the mission, or do I risk the mission and turn around and save my one guy? These moments are sometimes understated in a Larry Hama G.I. Joe comic. I think of like big dramatic soap opera moments in like a Chris Claremont Uncanny X-Men issue, where like some character's been taken over by a bad guy and they like get them back, and there's like a page of this person, this like Shakespearean, it's like, I can't believe I was taken over by the Shadow King, whatever. And the emotional stuff in G.I. Joe, it is as important, but it's sort of smaller. And because it's an action comic and it's military, I think we sort of remember that stuff first, but that's not really what makes it. You know, it's like everyone talks about Silent Interlude, famous wordless issue 21, because of the story behind the story, right? The writer drew the issue, and the choreography and the storytelling is so clear. But the thing that we sort of forget, it's like, no, someone rescued someone in that issue, and then they needed rescuing by the person that they were trying to rescue. And then in the final page, there's this big reveal that these two characters have a backstory, and the bad guy's looking up in the air, and he's like, and we have to read into it, like, is he upset is Storm Shadow upset that Snake Eyes got away? Is Storm Shadow upset that the audience now knows that these two characters have a connection? And what is so great about this issue is that there are some emotional beats that all the bad guys get their comeuppance, right? I like the moral ambiguity and of like grown-up stories where not all good guys are good, and sometimes the bad guys win, because that does happen in real life. But a lot of times in a G.I. Joe story, I want the good guys to get out of there alive. I want them to save the scientist. I want the bad guys to get punished. I want it to all happen in a satisfying way. And Hama and Dan pulling this all off in just 20 pages with 6 Joes and a civilian, and 5 or 6 different vehicles, right?
It goes about,
this is not easy. It is not easy to draw these weird, like if they were all the same tank, like, and it was a made up plane, if Dan could just draw like any made up plane, if he draws it wrong, no one would notice. But it's like we're all like waiting for Dan or the artist of any issue to like draw a vehicle wrong, and then we can say like, that vehicle's not drawn right. I would have drawn it right. So this is a really, I don't want to say crowded, but this is a really full issue. And, you know, a lot of comics writers cannot pull off a 20-page story with this much happening. And the action choreography is really exciting. There's that panel where Blizzard and Iceberg have crossed paths on their skis, and they've made an X in the snow. You know, that is a writer and an artist paying attention to where characters are in space. And these are like vehicles that are moving, right? And this bit where the vehicles are going through a ravine and they have to go single file, you know, it's like something's going to happen. There's going to be an avalanche, or one's going to break down, or there's someone on the overlook looking down at them. This is a satisfying this is a comic book worth $4. Again, to our tens of thousands of listeners, if you are like illegally downloading the issue, or if you're just borrowing a friend's copy, or you're just hearing us tell you about it and you're not reading it, do go out and pay for this issue.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's important to note, because if you enjoy the comics, it's good to buy them, because then you get more. That's usually how it works. They'll hire us to do more if they sell well. So yeah, it's important to support your favorite comics, and you're right. It's a very dense issue, and but it's really those character trademarks that they're so unique and delineated. Each character in the G.I. Joe universe, it makes it a lot easier for me to draw, because I can hear each specific character react to their situation. So, but thank you very much for the compliments. I appreciate it, and I'm glad that it came off as well as it did. So it's
very good. Let's go into I Spy and see what teeny tiny details we might have spotted.
I spy with my little eye.
Dan, before I think we get into anything, were there any little Easter eggs in there that you've put into the art that maybe we've not talked about yet?
I'm trying to think if with this issue, I didn't put a lot of Easter eggs in, because I kind of considered emulating the cartoon as a giant Easter egg. So, I don't know if I can think of one specifically. I know the interior where the fire bat is inside the Terrordrome. It's I used a lot of reference from the comic from the 80s for that, because that was the only reference I could actually. It was challenging to find reference for the domes online, so I kind of had to roll with that. But I think it worked out well. I liked how they handled it in the 80s, so it looked good. But I spent a bit of time looking at the movie.
Are you talking about Pythona infiltrating
Yeah, that's
the
it.
Terror
Yeah,
Drome?
like in the beginning of the film. So I used some of that, of her sneaking in as reference as well. But mostly the comic book from the 80s for that.
Yeah, that sequence with her sneaking in is one of my all-time favorite.
Oh yeah,
elements from the cartoon.
So well done.
Such a
so well
cool.
done.
Mark, I spy 3 things.
Oof.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And I may have forgotten
good,
one,
good.
so yeah.
No, good things, good things. One is a Joe uses a grenade and then uses another grenade, and considering how almost every Joe has a grenade on their torso, pretty infrequently in the comic and basically never in the animated series does a Joe use a grenade. And as a kid, I thought grenades were really cool. I think guns, I understood guns and rifles, but grenades are more like a baseball, like a thing that you actually have in your everyday life. So I think just the very general idea of you throw this thing, it's this big, you can throw it this far, and then it goes boom, just made a little more sense to me. So I really like the bit where Iceberg uses a grenade and then uses another. I do wish the panel where he first pulls out his first grenade, I wish it was a little bigger because I had to sort of lean in and squint to see it.
Right.
But when he uses his second grenade, it's really clear because it's a green thing in front of an orange explosion, and it really pops. My second I Spy is Dr. Jen Tang. So there's a film director named Mark Chang who made a G.I. Joe fan film a couple years ago, Operation Red Retrieval. It's like 15 minutes, takes place in a warehouse. It looks great. And it posted online, and Larry Hama saw it and said, "Hey, that's neat." And so then the two of them, then Chang and Hama made a movie together. Hama wrote or did a rewrite on a movie that Chang and his producer were developing called Ghost Source Zero, which you can see on the internet. You can get it on streaming services. So Jen Tang in the real world is the real name of, I believe, Mark Chang's wife.
Oh, okay.
So this is an Easter egg where we've seen Hama put some names of some Hasbro people into G.I. Joe comics in the last few years, or like one or two of his friends, or sort of co-artists from years past. And so the scientist who the Joes rescue here is named after a real person who is, I believe, married to a collaborator of Hama's in the real world, a film director.
I didn't even know that. That's awesome.
My last I Spy is, I'm always a fan of knockouts in comics. I don't mean when someone punches someone unconscious. I mean when a panel is drawn entirely in one color or a layer. And the panel where, near the end of the story, where Lowlight shoots one of the bad guys in the head, the whole panel is just colored red, just as a background and the sound effect, because the character is all in silhouette, which is about the level of violence. So I don't need a G.I. Joe comic to get any more graphic than this. So as an old school comic coloring technique, right, something that's very exciting or passionate or angry or fiery or violent, you just color it all red or all blue. So those are my I Spies.
Nice.
One, I've not got too many things that we've not talked about already, but one of them was just a rare appearance of the Dominator, the Battle Force 2000 vehicle. Very rarely used in the book. Possibly just that previous appearance that we were talking about, or when they were in Frusenland last with the Battle Force 2000 team. And here it's had a redesign to make it a bigger, weightier, more tank-like vehicle that can accommodate multiple Joes in there. And as a design, I think it works. It makes a maybe not particularly interesting vehicle a lot more satisfying.
Yeah, it's a bit of a blocky vehicle, and I had to kind of make up a little bit of the interior because I couldn't find any reference for the inside of that vehicle. So hopefully I did all right. But it was fun to kind of, I imagined it as a giant battering ram. I know we kind of covered that in the story where it does actually ram into one of the wolves. But Yeah, it looks like a giant anvil sort of going through the snow. I imagine it being really heavy and very powerful. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as a toy, it looks very much like a toy, rather than as a real world vehicle. So I think it was an interesting change to have it, have the tweaks to make it look more like something that would be used in a real world situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
very good. Another one I had was thoughtful use of the ski missiles, the famous ski missiles on the Snowcat, a very unique kind of looking missile design to the toy, and something that anyone who had this toy as a child will immediately recognize and remember. So nice to see it being used as a plot point.
Mm-hmm.
And another one was an I Spy of things that I didn't see. So despite this being a Arctic mission and having a host of Arctic specialists, so Snowjob, Blizzard, Iceberg, Frostbite being the key Arctic specialists, they could have even gone further should you guys so wanted, because there was a number of I think we'd say C or D list Joes with Arctic specialities as well that could have been really dug into if we're going deep into the character benches there. So we've got Sub-Zero, Cold Front, Wind Chill, Snowstorm as examples of more Arctic Joes who must be just kicking themselves that they were.
It's not the Mortal Kombat Sub-Zero, is it? Or they're two different?
No, I think this is a different Sub-Zero.
Because I know G.I. Joe went into the Street Fighter because they had like those Street Fighter characters.
Yeah. No, this is an actual Joe with in Arctic gear.
Oh, nice.
Let's move on to Error Detected.
Oh yeah, this is the critique time. I'm ready.
Error detected. Error detected. No prize incoming.
I've got two which are nitpicks rather than any big errors. So one that I wondered about was the Snowcat. So it's shown throughout the issue with an empty rack of missiles, and then has a payoff that they've got one last missile that they can use and which they deploy. And my entirely plausible no prize, which is I'm sure something that you've thought about as you were drawing it, was that unlike we're dealing with a toy Snowcat where you have to have certain features for the toy to actually physically work. The missiles sit poking out of the front of the vehicle in a real life military missile launcher situation. That probably isn't particularly realistic or safe, and the missiles would actually sit much further back in the rack, out of sight. So when they are shot, they come out of almost nowhere. So the reason that we've not seen any missiles in the rack is just because they sit much further back and you wouldn't expect to see them.
That sounds like a good explanation. I like that. That works.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
My other one was, and Tim, as a more of an academic man than me, you might have a thought on this, was Dr. Tang was in Helsinki giving a dissertation. So a dissertation is typically a long piece of academic writing based on original research and submitted as part of an undergraduate or postgraduate degree. So giving a dissertation would not necessarily be, a talk. So and she probably didn't, as a doctor already, she probably wasn't going all the way to Helsinki to just hand in a dissertation. So probably she was actually delivering a presentation on her dissertation, and just saying that she was giving a dissertation was just a shorthand way of saying that.
Yeah. Mine is that the AVAC, the Firebot pilot, has a little circle on each shoulder that lines up with a rivet from an action figure where an arm connects to a torso.
Maybe I accidentally did that.
And I didn't notice it as I was reading the issue, but in flipping through it while we're talking, I'm looking at this panel and I see this circle on his shoulder. There's so many bits to these costumes, where one fabric tucks under, a glove or a gauntlet, or, there's a holster or a strap. myriad of reasons why this guy on his shoulder pieces would have a little groove shaped in a circle on the front of it.
Well, that's my attention to detail with the characters, because I was probably looking at the action figure, I would guess, thinking back on that. And that's one of the things I really like to do no matter what IP I'm working on, is just to make sure it looks as accurate as possible. So I was right down to the bolts on that guy.
Dan, I suspect that you consulted an animated episode from 1985 called Haul Down the Heavens for reference on the Snowcats.
Is that the one where he fights the polar bear? The Snake Eyes fights the polar bear? Because I referenced that one quite a bit, just for the snow.
Sort of remembering the beginning of the episode where the Cobra, isn't Cobra melting? Like all the Cobra's like taking over the Aurora Borealis, and the Snowcats are sort of melting in the snow. I remember the beginning of the episode. Not the end.
I don't think I referenced that one, but I wish I had at the time. Because that's where were you when I was?
The reason why I thought this is that the Snowcat vehicle itself it's a little short, and in that episode they're drawn very tall. And there are a couple panels here where the Snowcat is drawn very tall. And, like I was referring before to sort of the challenge of drawing this property, because all these vehicles are very specific and we want them to look accurate to the toys. One of the other challenges is even if you have good reference on a toy, from the internet, you don't necessarily have it standing next to another vehicle, right? So in my mind, the Dominator is bigger than the Snowcat. And I could figure that out from the internet, maybe by looking at their original prices, like their retail prices.
Yeah, that's a good way.
But I only had one of these. So in my mind, I have a good sense of how big a human is next to a Snowcat, and a Snowcat next to one of the other vehicles that I did own. I actually don't know, if I was to draw a story, I actually don't know which of these two vehicles I would make bigger and which sort of should be bigger. So my other I Spy was, I thought I figured out what episode you were using for reference, but also, at a certain point, if it's just like screen caps and like 2 weeks of like harried Googling, it's probably a lot of everything. It's like, well, this guy has a photo on his eBay listing, and this person, she has a blog and she talks about this one episode.
Yeah, it was a lot of, you're right, it was a lot of kind of, for lack of a better word, Frankensteining reference and kind of bringing it all together and hoping that I've got it accurate. So, but that was, like I had mentioned earlier, that was one of my main focuses, was to make sure that the characters and the vehicles were as close as I could get them.
Would you ever go to the extent, for example, of making a 3D model of any of these vehicles, went to assist you in your drawing? I know that some artists do use that a little bit as a tool.
I think it would depend. Like if it was a vehicle I was going to be drawing a lot of over the course of quite a few issues, I would spend the time doing it. But I don't really have a lot of extra time to. With comics in particular, the lead time isn't too long and the production time isn't too long, so I don't really have a lot of time to dive deep into each one specifically that well. But if I, like, for example, when I was working on Ghostbusters, there would be things that I would actually spend a bit more time kind of chiseling out so that I knew exactly how it looks from each angle. But for this issue in the G.I. Joe, I felt confident enough with the amount of reference I had with the toys. I was able to find enough rotations to kind of understand how it worked. I know with the Dominator, like you had mentioned, it looked more like a toy than a vehicle, and I did recognize that, so I tried to like take off some of the hinges, I guess, so it didn't look like a toy.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those vehicles that's sort of slightly past the peak of the G.I. Joe's popularity. So in terms of the people that had a Snowcat and sort of have tremendously fond feelings and very strong recollections of exactly what a snowcat looks like versus a Dominator, which is a vehicle that I've never had and never had any interest in owning. Very, very different. So I think you'll be given a lot more leeway to just do your own thing and sort of change up a Dominator versus a Snowcat where that's kind of, very firmly etched on people's minds and memories.
Yeah, for sure.
I think I get the sense from reading all of Marvel's Star Wars comics from the last couple of years that I get the sense that someone in editorial has handed over to the various artists 3D models of all of the spaceships because they're all always drawn perfectly, and sometimes they stick out because they're drawn too perfectly.
They might look like he traced the toy drawing or something, or like a photo. Do you mean, or
no, like a Google SketchUp 3D
oh
model.
I see, okay,
like not a photo of a toy. And sometimes it looks like the artists are copying and pasting, or as they shrink one of these tracings or like models in Photoshop next to art that they've drawn by hand, like the lines are all still incredibly perfect, and as they get smaller and smaller, they just sort of look like a thing made by the computer and not like a stormtrooper's helmet or something, which someone drew.
I get you. Yeah.
And I know that several years ago, during the brand new day era of Spider-Man, someone made a Google SketchUp 3D model of Peter Parker's apartment interior, which was given to the artists who were working on that run so that they could keep it all consistent. And, in the case of Star Wars spaceships, maybe one artist made it and shared it with a bunch of others. Maybe a bunch of artists made their own. Maybe like Lucasfilm provided it to Marvel. Maybe an artist said, no, I can do this by hand. And the editor said, okay. You see this in animation, it's like when hand-drawn and 3D stuff get mixed, sometimes the two don't mesh together. When they do, like in a movie like The Iron Giant, it's pretty satisfying. But, drawing vehicles is over and over and over in perspective is really hard. So to the artists of G.I. Joe comics who struggle, particularly with not much reference.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah, no, it's...
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you for starting.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. No, it's... for something like... well, you mentioned the Spider-Man with Peter's apartment. I think, if it's going to be over a long arc and you have a lot of different artists working on it, and you want that symmetry, you want to make sure that it's, the artists have the same reference, and that makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, I hear that.
Okay, very good. Yeah. Let's look at some hammerisms in Hammer Time.
Stop. Hammer time.
Time to beat the soles of your boots with my face. Sucking chest wounds, red ninjas, brain scanners, rubber oozes, blue ninjas. And then some more sucking chest wounds. Hammer time.
So not too many here. The ones that I picked out were a new turn of phrase that Larry has obviously become latched onto and has become fond of, which we've seen across a few of the recent issues, where when people are running empty on their ammo, they are Winchester. So that they have run out of their ammo. We've seen that a few times. And we've also got the hammerism here of, and we've talked about this already, a Cobra pilot acting like a complete asshole towards his ground crew, and it not entirely being to his advantage, because maybe if he'd have greased that wheel a little bit more, his missiles would have been in better working order when it came to needing them.
I've got two hammer times, Hama-isms, and they're a little subtle. One is there's a line of dialogue. Nice, turned right into my sight picture. So the Cobra Wolf is chasing the Dominator, and this is something where Hama in his stories is aware of. In action movies, like the good guy just like picks up any gun and knows how to use it. The safety's off, the clip is full. He just like runs forward, fires, and takes out all the bad guys. But in real life, you miss more than you hit. And there's things like turning corners, and your bullet or your missile can only go straight. And Hama is in his Action Comics keeping track of number of missiles or number of bullets in a clip, and the physical space of, it's like, no, can my shot actually hit the target? Or sometimes someone turns right into my line of fire. And then the other one is page 3, panel 1. The Snow Serpent says, "You have an hour." And then on page 6, panel 1, one of the Joes says, "It's going to take an hour at least to fix this." And so Hama is setting up a limitation to the story so that as a reader, we know, in 5 or 10 pages, this hour is going to be up, and like that plane's going to be flying, and or this snowcat's going to be driving, just as a way to head the story threads to their conclusion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it gives it a sense of immediacy. There's a time limit, and it kind of creates more tension. So it's a really good story element to use.
Good. Let's move on to colloquialisms.
There used to be a pudding that was over-egged. You know the pudding. You know the pudding. At first it was British, but then it was Commonwealth. You know the pudding. You know the pudding. But now there's a new player in town, a comic book writer of some renown. He's using real-world examples and peppering the issues with lots of samples. It's a Larry Hammer colloquialism. He's talking G.I. Joe and all its heroism. Can you guess what it is? Is it something new? Now listen as Larry drops a slice of real life on you.
A colloquialism that I spotted was the use of the phrase "caught flat-footed." Now, I don't know if how, being a Brit, I don't know if this is something that is in common usage or not, but it's not one that I've particularly encountered much, and certainly wouldn't use in everyday language myself. Is it one that you guys are familiar with?
I've heard it in reference to police, usually, or like in old shows and comics. That usually they call them flatfoots. So
yeah,
I have heard the term before.
Yeah, same here. But I can't offer any additional.
Yeah, I wonder if that sort of reference to police is a slightly different reference. I guess that a police reference would probably be a reference to a beat cop who's doing a lot of walking and maybe wearing down the heel of their boots. In the case where it was being specifically caught flat-footed, that's a reference to being caught unprepared and being taken by surprise, and apparently originated from American baseball at the beginning of the 20th century. So I guess not being quite ready for the pitcher chucking the ball at them. I guess that maybe your feet aren't quite lined up in the right position, and I think belonging to a similar origin to being on the back foot, I believe.
I never knew that. Thank you. That's quite fascinating. I always like learning these little things, these little intricacies. So that's great.
And then let's move on to favorite line of dialogue.
Favorite line of dialogue.
Dan, should we start with you? Did you have a favorite line from this?
I can't pick one, but I just liked everything the officer said because he was just so angry the whole time. It was just quite a lot of fun to draw him.
Yeah, these kind of characters Larry has, he's really able to capture, and I think it sort of brings out some of his best dialogue moments when he's got these bombastic, over-the-top baddies. And it was actually one that I selected. It was near the beginning of the book. The Snow Serpent is saying, "Is there anybody still standing who is capable of delivering a coherent after-action report? Bring that techno-viper here."
That's awesome. So they're tongue twisters, aren't they? So serpents set down by the seashore.
Tim, did you have a favorite one?
It's the final panel of the first page. The Snow Serpent. "Spare me the obvious. Dismount and help these hapless idiots before they manage to make things worse." which both reinforces, what we've known for a long time, in that Cobra does not have as much expertise as the Joes, but also that we're surprised when one Cobra does. And that this guy, like, I'm worried about this Snow Serpent because he's going to be a tough cookie for this issue. But also this dialogue represents on this first page that the story starts in media res, that the Terradromes have already been attacked, and the scientist has already been saved, and this is something that happens in a lot of G.I. Joe comics, and I'm always very excited. It's cool if the first 5 pages are like Hawk and the Joes back at headquarters, and Hawk saying, "Go to the Arctic, save this scientist. Here's who we think's going to be there. I want you and you and you to take this vehicle." That's exciting too, but you don't always need that. And some of my favorite comics, I flip open the cover, and on the first page, we're halfway into the story.
Yeah, it's great, and it's great. It's a great establishing first page and dialogue. Is sort of introducing what's happened. We're right in the middle of things, and we've got this sort of bombastic Snow Serpents. Yeah, maybe who's got a little bit more of a skill set than your typical Cobra. And as you say, you could quite easily have had a story where we see the kidnap, we see the rescue, we see them blowing up the Terradrome and driving away, and that's the end. Where so it's sort of picking up almost at the end of the typical story. And there was a great G.I. Joe Special Missions issue where I think we've had it was like a 2-3 parter where the Joes are in a mountainous area, I think Tibet or somewhere like that. They're on their mission, doing a more typical mission-y thing, and then we cut to another issue, which is the evac crew in the Tomahawk helicopter who are making their way to actually capture them, and sort of then the storylines sort of join up, where we've had this helicopter crew who've had their own mission of their own and a huge amount of turmoil getting from A to B to actually rescue the Joes, and sort of coming to a head. And it's a nice sideways look at the typical storytelling.
And I guess we're all in agreement that the officer was the MVP of the issue, since we all picked him as the favorite quote.
I think, it gets my vote.
The Snow Serpent?
Yeah.
I kind of want to go for Lowlight because I don't think we've ever seen him use his skills as a sniper, and he's such a contrast. He's the guy in black, everyone else is in white. He's the loner he's the guy who's almost left behind. But Snow Serpent is a close second. Okay.
That sounds good. Yeah, Lowlight's a classic, so he was one of the reasons why I was like, we got to do this one.
I have one last quick question, if I can. Dan, all of the snow, did you draw the snow, or did colorist Lewis draw the snow?
I left the outlines for the snow. Do you mean the falling snow or the snow on the ground?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
The falling snow, I did that, and I would add it in after. So, and it's just basically color hold. There's no line on it. I wanted it to actually look a lot like the cartoon, so I looked a lot at how they handled snow, and I added all that in. And sometimes I would add it in before he'd color it, and sometimes I would add it in after. It depends on what was happening on the page. I can't remember which pages we did that exactly with, but it was kind of 50-50. He didn't mind. Luis didn't mind because that was less for him to color.
So with the issue all wrapped up on our discussion, I think it's just left to us to give you a massive thanks for joining us and discussing the issue. It was really good to get your take and find out more about your story behind the story, and particularly for taking the time to get up at so early in the morning to catch up.
Yeah, the early Joe catches the Cobra, they say. So, it was a pleasure to discuss G.I. Joe with both of you, and to kind of go over the comic and a little bit of my insight to it. Hopefully, I've answered all your questions, and double hopefully that I'll get to draw another one in the future. We can chat again.
Yeah. That is definitely a sentiment that is echoed. We look forward to getting you back on the book.
Excellent.
Not too far down the line.
Awesome.
Indeed.
Yeah, my pleasure. Dan. Thanks very much for having me on.
Oh, and before you go, would you like to promote anything? What have you got to tell us about that you're working on next, and where should people find you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter under Danny Schoening, which is pretty simple. I'm also on Instagram. I have Dan Schoening on there. Occasionally I'll do Twitch streams, so I'll draw live on Twitch. Same name, Dan Schoening, which is easy. You know, I made it easy for everybody. And currently I am working again with Eric Burnham, and who I worked with on Ghostbusters, and Luis Delgado, who we've talked about quite a bit in our discussion, and we're doing a Godzilla comic. So that will be coming out in April, I think next month, the first issue. So yeah, so it's more of an animated kind of leaning into Disney Pixar with that, and it's a different take on Godzilla. So if you like Godzilla, it would be cool to see Godzilla and G.I. Joe mixed together. I would like to see that. I don't know how that would work, but it would be cool.
There are some in later G.I. Joe. There are some monster hunters. They're in big armor, and the toys came with sort of Play-Doh for their armor. So there's sort of a way to do it. I gotta look those up.
That could
After
be
the
interview. I'm gonna go look at that.
You're gonna have to pitch that now as a limited mini.
Yeah, that's what we'll be talking about
Joe
next.
versus Godzilla's.
For sure.
And on your pitch notes. And did you know there was a specific G.I. Joe sub branch which was all about monster hunters? So
yeah, I never knew that. So this is awesome. That's great.
Okay, we'll just take 10%. That's fine.
All right.
Right. Lovely to have you on board, and really enjoyed the discussion. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks very much, guys. You take care.
So yeah, that was great. Tim, really enjoyed talking to Dan. Knows his stuff, and a great issue. I think I wouldn't have felt ashamed giving my Yo Joe-ish score with him online, because I really enjoyed the issue.
Yeah, good guest. Good on you for thinking to get him, and good on Dan for being available and wanting to talk. I am ready with my score.
Okay, go on. You go first.
8.5.
Ooh, that's high. It's certainly the highest you've given so far, isn't it? I think I'm going to go similar. I think I'll go 8. I'm tempted to go higher. I don't know that there's necessarily an issue from the IDW era of ARAH that I've enjoyed more, to be honest. Yeah, it certainly is not jumping to my mind off the top of my head, but yeah, it's if not my favorite, it's certainly up there. It's a really fun story. The production values on this issue and with the art, just really sung, and really enjoyed it. Like to see Dan get back on this ASAP.
To take nothing away from other artists who are currently drawing issues of G.I. Joe, I would love to see more issues drawn by Dan Schoening. In terms of how this issue could be a 9 or a 10, I'd like it to be 5 or 20 pages longer. I really like holding a double or triple sized comic book. This might be my lack of familiarity with some of these Arctic vehicles, but there was one panel where I had a little hard time following the action, and that's actually that same panel I alluded to, where with on the Dominator,
with the
someone's
grenade,
saying, nice, turned right into my sight picture, and I so that dialogue tells me that someone has turned, and in the panel, I think I just see two vehicles driving straight, and in comparing how these vehicles are to the previous panels, I can't immediately tell that a vehicle has turned. So I think it's covered in the dialogue where the Snow Serpent in the second to last panel says, "Slew around, get those Joes." So he's telling someone to turn, and then in the next panel, I think the visual is that someone has now turned, and I kind of want to see a vehicle like with a blur where it's turning, or with its tracks having just turned. And a couple pages later, Dan actually draws the Snowcat on the second to last page, on the second to last panel, above the panel where Lowlight is being a sniper. Okay, let's do it. Dan draws the Snowcat twice in one panel, and Luis, the colorist, pushes it back, so it's like a blur. It's like a panel where you see Spider-Man 4 times, the three ones he's like getting to the position where he lands, and he's colored in lighter. So I think this is what I needed in that other panel that I referred to. But 8.5, great comic.
Yeah. The very ending, I was a little, I thought that Low Light was taking quite a big risk, sort of coming at the Joes in the Cobra vehicle without warning them, though. Setting himself up for a risk of friendly fire.
That's true. At the same time, they're all out of missiles, and didn't Iceberg say early on, but 5.56 NATO just bounces off their frontal armor. Right, so I'd have to check which of the two Cobra vehicles he's talking about, but I think we've established that
they're sitting ducks, and
that Iceberg is safe to drive right up to the Joes in a Cobra vehicle without getting shot.
Very good. Let's have a quick toy talk.
Mark talks about toys, ho ho. He talks about G.I. Joe. He talks about all the toys from the comic book and the animated show. Mark talks about toys. Mark talks about toys.
So, just generally, I thought it might be interesting to talk about the Artic Joes and some of our favourites. I think one that I sprung to mind that may be less obvious was Frostbite, one of my favourite Artic Joes, coming with the Snowcat and having one of the most satisfying guns of all of the G.I. Joe figures. That sort of, I don't know if it's an M16 with a mounted scope. I'm maybe getting the exact details wrong, but one of my favorites, and one that saw a lot of play, and a lot more satisfying than maybe some of the guns that came with other figures, like for example Stalker. If you flash back into some of his NAM missions, swap out his gun for that one. Very good.
Frostbite is the only Joe, I believe, who is smiling, and you see his teeth, and there's a tiny groove in the sculpt under his upper lip, under his teeth. There's a tiny recess where his upper teeth are, if I'm remembering correctly. My figure's in the other room. But there's it's as if he's got an open mouth smile, and it's a tiny bit of additional articulation that's not in any other figure, which even as a kid I recognized was different and exciting. You mentioned when we were talking with Dan about how a lot of kids had and love the Snowcat, and that was certainly true for me. The ski missiles, like, they don't make sense in the real world because the missile would just launch off the ski, right? You can't actually attach it, but it's such a cool visual, and the way that it's used in the television commercial for the toy with all this fake snow, and you see this, kid's hand pick it off and slide it along the fake snow. And the ad is super exciting. I'm gonna pick as an Arctic toy thing to talk about for a moment. There's a 4-pack of figures that was available in 1993 as a mail order called the Arctic Commandos. And it's Stalker version 2 recolored, Sub-Zero recolored, DJ recolored, and Snow Serpent version 2 recolored. And this was one of the last G.I. Joe anythings that I bought during the era of Real American Hero. So it feels to me sort of both valuable and rare and sort of unlikely. Like this was at the end of things. It's like we were losing G.I. Joe. Sergeant Savage was coming. And I love that Stalker's new colors are similar to his old colors. It's just a small change, but that Sub-Zero's been inverted. So his white is now blue and his blue is now white. DJ sort of splits the difference. His colors, if you squint, have a similar treatment to his original figure, and yet there's just more white and blue. And then, as neat as I think that Snow Serpent version 2 is, it's sort of under-detailed compared to the original Snow Serpent, who's just got all this stuff on him and comes with a bunch of accessories. And the snowboard is cool, but it feels a little, 90s extreme.
Cowbunga. Yeah.
And I like the colors for the Snow Serpent version 2, but they don't make sense. Like it's not enough Arctic. It's just like cool Cobra colors. And version 2 sort of splits the difference. It's like half colors that make some sense in the Arctic, and yet there's some red and purple, which says Cobra.
And this was mail order only, was it?
Yeah.
This is one that I never had and never was on my radar before. So yeah, interesting.
It's also fun that it's a mix. It's 3 good guys and a bad guy, which is instant play value. If this is the only thing you get, you can immediately have a game with a story.
Yeah,
and you don't have to imagine a bad guy or a good guy.
Yeah, he's in trouble though against 3 Joes. Not good odds, as they said in the book itself. Very good. So that's that. We'll save some G.I. Joe merchandise for the next time we speak, and which leaves us just enough time for a short bout of INUEN-JOE.
Attention. At this moment, you are now listening to
Talking INUEN-JOE.
If you are offended by words like
sucking, flesh wound, willy, Pete, balls, crystal balls, hypno shield,
whatever, take the tape out now. This is not a pop album. And by the way, suck my
grandmother's brick in a Prada handbag.
Sometimes G.I. Joe names can sound a little bit dirty, and they sound a little bit more dirty when I really try and make them sound dirty, which is what I'll do next. And the aim of the game is to get a minimum of a titter, and once I hear a guffaw, then I will stop the game and declare myself the winner. So let's go and with 10 names and see how far we get into them. Wild Weasel, Blue Ninja, it's called Blue for a reason, Flash, Stalker, Road Toad, Mudbuster, Grunt.
Damn it. What have you done?
How did he get that nickname? It wasn't because of his rank. Someone listening to a door with a cup against their ear.
When it must have been 85. I hadn't discovered Mad Magazine yet, but I certainly had not discovered Cracked Magazine. But someone I knew had an issue of Cracked, and it had some kind of G.I. Joe parody in it, and it was G.I. Joke. And I just frowned. I would not read it. I would not engage. I didn't want to talk to my friend about it. I didn't like that favorite thing of mine getting poked fun of.
Sorry, Tim.
It's okay. It's the duties of co-host.
Let's just think of it as a healing and therapeutic process.
Wow.
So that was good. I enjoyed that episode a lot. I really enjoyed talking to Dan. And the next time you'll see us on Talking Joe, we will be back with Jay as the disavowed crew, covering Devil's Due number 5, and also taking a look at the battle files that came out at the same time. And then back here we will be covering ARAH 279, which will be the next part of the Untold Tales. Untold Tales Part 4, where Cobra has plans to unleash hellacious havoc from the Terrordrome. So it's up to Ace, Slipstream, and the other Joe Air Warriors to unleash justice from the skies and stop the imminent destruction from the Drome before it's too late. We've got piloting from Larry Hammer as normal and assisted by his co-pilot, artist Alex Sanchez. So we are bang up to date at the moment, so that issue isn't even out as we're speaking. So we will cover that once it is, and we've had a chance to get back together and talk. In the meantime, you can find us in all of the usual places. Talking Joe, a G.I. Joe podcast on Facebook. Talking Joe on Twitter. Talking Joe Comics, or one word, on Instagram. And you can find us at talkingjoe.co.uk, the website, which has got all of the links to everything. And also make sure you check out our brand new YouTube channel where I am trying to post weekly videos. And just up at the time of recording is the Disavowed episode 2, where we look at the Disavowed era comics 2 through to 4 with lots of fun visuals. Tim, where can people find you?
Facebook.com/A Real American Book, Instagram, A Real American Book, but best of all, arealamericanbook.com.
Very good. And we can find out all about the year that you have been having, the highlight of which was joining us, of course. Meanwhile, sorry. Dear. And with all that said and done, you can catch us down the road.
Because we've been talking Joe.
And we're all out of Joes, particularly Arctic ones. Mind you, actually, we're not out because I already said that, there was plenty more, on the benches that could have been used. So, yeah, there's still Joes, but we're out of time. At any rate.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, listeners.
Laters.